And some people show up to church maybe once or twice a year, you know. So I'm saying even if you have a faith, I don't know what I should expect about how much you know about it. But I'm saying this about the humans at large. Most of us do not know anything meaningful about other people's religions. If you are on the short list of somebody who knows, you know, not just your own thing in terms of faith and religion, but other people's as well, I applaud that. And I'm just exhorting everybody, I think it's a really good idea to educate yourself as to what do those other people believe. I've made sort of a lifelong amateur study of that. I'm not trained in theology, though I have hung around with more theologians than you can count. I was a student at Catholic University. My goodness. I spent 5 years as an undergraduate. It took me an extra year, I am proud to say. I spent about 5 years there as a graduate student. I spent about 13 years teaching there part-time. And I'm asking you to just trust me. I know a lot of theologians, most of whom are Catholic, but not all. I wanted to offer this thought, that when you look around the human religions, and just look at it in terms of what do they teach about how it all began. You know, the creation story and the origin of species story. One thing that surprised me when I was new to this is how similar the creation stories that many of the world's religions teach. You might assume that those people who believe that other thing have way different stories than what your own faith teaches. And I'm not saying they're all identical, no I'm not. And I'm not even saying that all of them are pretty much the same story. But I'm saying that many of them, when you check them out one at a time, have a surprising constancy to them. I want to speak of the Judeo-Christian creation stories, and I need to say this up front. I wish to speak of them not because I do believe them and not because I don't believe them. I want to bring them up because in American culture, they are the most common creation story out there. It's the one that more people are familiar with than any other. And I neither confirm nor deny the truth of them. I'm just using it for my own purposes here. That story excuse me, because, you know, the thought I was about to start went like this. You know, that story, the creation story that's in the book of Genesis. And let me start that sentence over, because you know there are two creation stories in the book of Genesis. And for the record, and this isn't homework or anything, but I'm just saying if you know your Old Testament stuff, you knew that. There's two creation stories in the book of Genesis. They disagree with one another, by the way. If I'm sharing something you never thought about, go read the book. That's not homework. I'm just saying if you didn't know that, come on, get with it. The two creation stories in the Judeo-Christian canon go like this. The first one, Genesis 1, that's the 7 days of creation, where on the first day God did, you know, that thing. And then on the second day, God did the next thing up until, well, 6 days actually, right? Because the seventh was a day of rest. So if you're familiar with that one, the 7 days thing has a couple problems when you look at it scientifically. And I want to point this out first, though. If you take that story, the 7 days story, as a series of events where something happened first, and then, you know, something happened next, and then something happened next. Don't worry about the day thing. Just think of it as a series of events. It gives a very precise chronology, you know, as a series. You know what's cool? If you compare the 6 days of creation, if you compare that story with the story that science tells, one rather small exception. The series of events in Genesis 1 is the same series of events that modern science presents as our story of, man, where did it all come from? Starting with day one, the Big Bang, let there be, by the way, have you thought about let there be light, Big Bang? Has it occurred to you that that's quite possibly the same thing? I'm not the first person to have thought that thought, by the way. And I know theologians who go, dude, you're being really stupid to assert that the Big Bang and let there be light are the same event. But if you look at it like a physicist would, the Big Bang was a tremendous outpouring of energy. You know, there was no matter at the beginning. In the beginning, I'm telling the Big Bang story, in the beginning, God, this is impossible to imagine, you guys. What there was all the energy that was ever going to exist in the universe came into being at one point in space, at one point in time. It began as a point, and if you know your geometry, a point is infinitesimally small. It has no dimension, no measurable dimensions at all. But the story of the Big Bang is, yeah, at some point, energy came flooding out from that point, and by the way, all the energy that we're ever going to have, no matter, just pure energy. Let there be light. There was no matter at the beginning. By the way, the science part of this story, we're on pretty solid ground here. The temperatures were so high that matter could not exist at those temperatures. And for the moment, don't worry about how do you take the temperature of the Big Bang. There's plenty of direct and indirect evidence that lets you kind of calculate. The whole universe was in a hot, dense state. Hot, dense. All the energy that ever was going to be. Very high temperature event. Hot, dense, yeah. It's been spreading out ever since. It's still spreading, by the way. The universe is still expanding. But it was pure energy at the beginning. It had to cool off until you could get matter. By the way, the one physics equation everybody knows, seriously. I don't know if anybody knows what it means, but...
MC squared.
By the way, if you talk to physicists about this, Einstein seemed to know what this meant. That one, E equals mc squared. What's E? Energy. What's M? Yeah, mass or matter. What's an equal sign? It's an equal sign. Energy is mass. The equal sign isn't kidding. Energy and mass, turns out energy and mass are the same thing. That formula describes, see, most amateurs look at it and go, that's the formula for if you convert matter to energy, or if you convert energy to matter. That's the formula that explains how much energy. So like if you had a nuclear reactor, the standard way people think about it is what's happening in that reactor is you're starting with some matter, some M, and you're converting it to E, energy. And if you know how to work the formula, you could calculate, I don't know, let's say you had a gram of uranium and you wanted to know how much energy would you get out of a gram of uranium. Listen, that's the normal way of looking at it, and it's wrong. Because if you think that you're converting one thing into another, this formula is actually saying those two things are the same thing. Energy equals matter. C, by the way, is just a multiplication factor. C is the speed of light. And if all you knew is that C is a very large number, and C squared is that very large number squared, which is a really, really large number. Okay? So that would imply that you'd get a very large amount of energy out of a very small amount of M. Yeah. But listen, they're the same thing, matter and energy. In physics, you know, here, let me try this one on you. This is an analogy that's not quite straight up true. as a comparison. But tell me you agree that steam and ice are the same thing. They're both H2O, right?
Yeah.
Now you look at steam and you go, dude, that's really different from an ice cube. It seems like they're two different things, right? The physical properties of ice are different from the physical properties of steam or liquid water. We could throw a third one in there too. It's all the same stuff. Water and ice and steam are just different states of matter. And, nobody goes, damn, that's unusual. Look at it this way. Energy and matter are two different states of the very same thing. If you needed a name for, what would you call that very same thing? Call it matter energy. Make up some word that includes both matter and energy. All there is that stuff, matter energy. The Big Bang, all the matter energy that was ever going to exist in the entire universe. And by the way, here we are, how many billion years ago?
4.5.
Come on, you know the song. Nearly 14 billion years ago. Okay, yeah. So yeah, that event happened 14 billion. I love that show, man. The theme song has so much reality in it. Big Bang Theory, yeah. So listen, start with that. The story that science tells is that once upon a time, back at the beginning, there was this event where a bunch of energy, because it was too hot for the humans of the 21st century to call it matter, a bunch of energy, nothing but pure energy, flooded the universe coming out from one point. Picture it as an explosion. Let there be light. The Big Bang. What I like about the phrase, let there be light, is that it's so poetic. I mean, the Big Bang, let's face it, that is not a poetic phrase, The guy who made it up as kind of a joke, and he didn't know it was going to stick, the Big Bang. Yeah. Back to my point, because we're here to talk about the origin of species. And it's necessary, and by the way, you guys as biologists, this will happen to you. Because you got friends, you got neighbors, you got classmates who will know this about you. You're a science major, you're a biology person, and there are people who figure you might actually have something to say that they might want to know about issues of creation and evolution and speciation. And if nothing else, I'm trying to give you the rudiments of how would you think your way through this. My assertion was that when you read the 7 days of creation story, the sequence of events, starting with day one, the Big Bang, let there be light, and then on the second day something else happened, then on the third day, the series of events is nearly in perfect agreement with the story that science tells about, what happened first, what happened next, what happened next. I mentioned there's actually sort of 2 points of potential disagreement, and neither of them is a big deal unless you make it a big deal, okay? One is, what does day mean? What does day mean? I'm being real serious. I'm being a hardcore science geek right now. What's a day?
24 hours.
I like that, but wait, why is a day that 24-hour thing that makes us go, yeah?
That's how long it takes for the Earth to rotate on its axis.
around the sun.
Louder, please?
That's how long it takes for Earth to rotate on its axis.
Yeah, you know this about Earth, right? It spins once every 24 hours, right? That's why a day is a 24-hour day. The planet you live on spins around that fast. We have 24-hour days. By the way, you know that elsewhere in our very own solar system, days are different.
Mm-hmm.
How long is a day on Jupiter? Does anybody know?
3 months?
Because I looked it up. 8 hours. Jupiter spins faster than Earth, which is kind of amazing because it's huge. Jupiter is freaking huge. But Jupiter spins every 8 hours. So listen, if you lived on Jupiter, you'd have yourself an 8-hour day. Okay? How long is a day on Mercury? I'll make it easy for
4
you.
hours.
Months. Mercury does in fact spin, but it spins so slowly that, listen, in Earth time, it's a bunch of those 24-hour days. It's months worth of 24-hour days. So listen, I want to start with that because this is a science class now, isn't it? That what a day is how long it takes your planet to spin around us. Now, I want to ask, not so rhetorically, if there is a God, how long is a day if you're God?
However long it takes for you to spin around?
Well, that's kind of what I get. That if God lived on Earth, it'd be a 24-hour day. Okay? If God lived on Jupiter, it'd be like an 8-hour day. If God lived on Mercury, we'd be talking months. By the way, I myself, just so you know, I'm utterly convinced that there is a divine being. And if you want to call that God, I'm cool with calling him or her God. But I'm really convinced that there's no other explanation for the universe. I might be wrong, but I have a very deep-seated intuition that there's got to be some ultimate cause, you know. But listen, when you get hardcore about if you're God, what's a day? And then you realize, oh, it depends what planet you live on. If you wish to assume that God lives on a planet, which, by the way, I do not wish to assume that, okay? I don't know exactly what I conceive heaven to be or hell to be. I know that good is real, by the way, and I know that evil is real. Trust me, I know these things. So the idea that there might be more than one place where, you know, we end up, I'm good with that too. But man, I have a hard time picturing heaven as located on any planet, you know what I mean? I assume it's somewhere. By the way, I don't assume that it's limited to our three-dimensional reality down here, but that's another story. But I myself, just speaking purely as opinion that I'm highly confident of, it's not a planet, okay? So, see, when you get all literal, and there are creation people that try to get literal with Scripture, where it's word for word true because it's the Word of God, you know? I'm being honest, I have trouble interpreting Scripture that way because it was written down by humans using human language. And by the way, it's been translated, now hasn't it? Listen, hold on, I'm on a roll. Humans wrote it down. Now, if you want to believe, and I'm not opposed to this way of thinking of it, man, if there were a divine being that was just telling, Moses is usually credited with having written down the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It may or may not have been him personally, but he often gets the credit. And I'm willing to believe that, you know, that some divine being was speaking to him and go, dude, write this down because in the future people are going to want to hear this. But think about a fallible human writing stuff down. I am not willing to believe in infallible humans. By the way, I grew up Catholic, and Catholic teaching is, yeah, the Pope is one of those. And I mean no offense to those of you who are Catholic. I mean no offense to those who believe that the Pope is infallible. I'm just saying I am incapable of accepting that. Might be wrong. I could be going to hell for several things I'm bringing up this morning. Hold it, I'm still on that roll. May I ask you to just sit there? I'll give you your turn, though. Keep bugging me. So listen. Even after the first human wrote it down, that's not the version you and I are reading from. You and I are reading translations. And if you ask, are translators infallible? That's another thing I'm just unwilling on my own end to put credence in. So listen, I'm just sharing with you my own solution to those who object that when it all happened was there were these 6 24-hour days back in the beginning. By the way, Earth didn't even exist back then, now did it? No. So where are you going to find yourself a 24-hour planet to call home and go, oh, that's how long a day is? I don't know. I'm just saying. I know a lot of theologians who are good with looking at the Judeo-Christian creation story this way. If you take the word day to mean some arbitrary period of time, one of my favorite theologians that I'm friends with, her take on it is What's a day to God? It's whatever amount of time he or she feels like calling a day, you know? So if you take it to be, yeah, it could be a human day, it could be 1,000 years, could be 1,000,000 years, could be 1,000,000,000 years. What is time to God? Very likely nothing, but that's, and I'm not saying that, I'm not requiring anybody to believe anything. Please know that I'm not trying to convert anybody into thinking about this the way I think about it. But I'll tell you, once you get over the 24-hour day thing and then look for truth in the story, what strikes me is the agreement between the series of events in the story that science tells and the series of events that the book of Genesis tells. Now, the fact that they both tell the story doesn't mean that it's true, but it means there's evidence coming from two directions that support the same way of looking at it. By the way, since I mentioned that there's one little disagreement in the series of events, I should tell you what that is. Genesis 1, when it gets around to talking about living things and the order they appeared, the fossil record agrees with Genesis 1, the series of events, with one exception, and the exception is the beasts of the air. And depending on the translation, if you're an Old Testament fan, not all the translations word it that way, the beasts of the air. But Genesis 1 asserts that the beasts of the air came before the beasts of the land. Now, if they mean birds, that's backwards. And by the way, some translations, depending on which Bible you favor, some translations actually call them birds. And that's the point of disagreement. What we know from the fossil record, by the way, is that birds are dinosaurs. Birds evolved out of a bunch of land-dwelling reptiles. Okay? So the fossil record teaches that beasts of the land preceded the birds. So if you want that to be a problem, if you claim that, yeah, science and religion agree about that stuff, if you want that to be a problem, then it's a problem. If you want it not to be a problem, I'll share with you one way that theologians have dealt with it. If you get generous with the phrase beasts of the air, if you just don't assume that it means birds, and keep in mind what you and I read is a translation of a translation, probably of a translation, okay? Hardly anybody is reading the actual words that Moses wrote down when he wrote this stuff down. If you take the beasts of the air to be flying creatures in general, don't narrow it down to the birds, but animals that fly, that kind of works. There's a Jewish theologian that I've talked to about this that was willing to go with flying fish over this one. By the way, flying fish do not fly. They don't flap, but they can shoot out of the water and glide for 50 meters or more. Have you ever seen that, by the way, flying fish?
No.
Because once they get airborne, they can ride air currents and travel a pretty good distance through the air before they head back down. So if you want to go back to a time when all life was underwater, and by the way, the fossil record makes it clear, life began underwater and then came up onto land. So if you want to claim that the beasts of the air preceded the beasts of the land, flying fish give you one way to make that come true. You could also go with flying insects. There's ways around that one little glitch in the series of events. I'm not claiming to you that I know this is absolutely true. What I'm really doing is trying to compare two different stories about the origin of things. And I'm choosing to compare what the fossil record teaches with what Genesis 1 teaches. I've been keeping you waiting long enough. What do you got?
Well, firstly then, some theologians, I was just going to around the bit about days where some theologians would say that God's outside of time. So if that were true, then it would be just dividing the eras up for convenience. But the other thing was that if we're going to go with dinosaurs as beasts of the air, technically all that's left of dinosaurs now is beasts of the air. They are the end result
Yeah.
of that. And then the rest of the mammals that we know today.
By the way, not all birds fly either, but yeah,
Well, yeah.
some birds are still beasts of the air. But yeah, the ancestors of birds, the fossil record is real clear on that. They were dinosaurs. We even know what particular type of, land-based, land-dwelling dinosaur they were. And as an aside to the whole group, y'all are going to reconstruct the family tree of the birds and the dinosaurs. You're going to go into it with the claim that T-Rex and chickens are cousins to each other. And you're going to reconstruct the family tree, the phylogenetic tree, in a couple weeks. After spring break, we're going to get onto that. But hold on, because I just want to, there's a notion on the floor, and thank you for that God may well be a being outside of time rather than inside of time. You know what's weird about the Big Bang? Bunch of stuff, but try this one. This will make your brain hurt, and I won't even pretend that I understand this. But I know that when you look at what are those Big Bang people talking about, really, it gets this weird. Imagine that you wanted to witness the Big Bang. So you get a time machine, go back in time, and pretend that you know exactly where it's going to happen when it happens, because it's going to happen at one point. So imagine you travel back in time to like 5 minutes before the Big Bang. You're just waiting around, go over there. It's going to happen over there, and then you wait for it to go off. By the way, don't stand too close. Okay, here's what's wrong with trying to imagine it that way. It turns out that neither space nor time existed before the Big Bang. Think about that as a weird thought. See, we assume that, space already existed, and at some point in space, this Big Bang thing happened. That's not how it was. Space itself did not exist before the Big Bang. See, when you picture the Big Bang as an explosion, the way everybody pictures it is a bunch of energy is just flooding out into space. That's not it. Space itself is expanding. The thing that is exploding outward from that initial point isn't just matter energy. Space itself is expanding. Space itself did not exist. If your brain can hold that concept, you're better than I am. Okay? I can say the words, I cannot picture it. Hold on, I'm on a roll. The other thing that's wrong with, get in your time machine, just go back and wait in the neighborhood. That implies that time existed before the Big Bang. The idea that you could go back to some point in time before the Big Bang, it turns out that time did not exist either. Time was created, and I'm using the verb created deliberately. Time was created, space was created, matter and energy were created at the moment of the Big Bang. By the way, when I talk about creation, and this is a useful distinction, and bear with me please, in my mind you got creation with a capital C and you got creation with a little c. Okay? When you look up create in the dictionary, creation with a little c, what does create mean?
To make something.
To make something
From nothing.
out of nothing. Virtually every scientist you talk to about the Big Bang will acknowledge that creation happened then. Because before the Big Bang, there was nothing. No time, no energy, no matter, no space. Before the Big Bang, there was nothing. And after the Big Bang, there was everything. If you ask, did the universe get made starting with nothing, the answer is yeah. Okay? There's mythology afoot that scientists, and especially, Big Bang Theory kind of scientists, are all atheistic, and that what we're up to is we're trying to prove that the whole God created everything is false. Actually, no. What we're up to is looking for evidence. There was a process by which the universe formed, okay? And science seeks to uncover the process. My favorite question, and by the way, I know scientists who rebel at this one. I know theologians who rebel at this one, but this is mine. I'm willing to believe the evidence that supports, the Big Bang hypothesis, right? There's a ton of evidence, and you can't just wish it away. To my mind, there's still an unanswered question. My way of asking the unanswered question is, who lit the fuse? A more scientific way of asking my question is, okay, there was an event. What caused the event? And there's two kinds of science people, by the way. Stephen Hawking, who might be the most brilliant human on earth, he's willing to believe that it was an event with no cause, that it simply happened, a quantum fluctuation. Good luck with quantum theory if they ever make you take physics and learn quantum theory. But in Stephen Hawking's science, there's room for the possibility that it just happened all by itself for no reason. I'm sharing this with you. You cannot convince me that there is such a thing as an event without cause. Or if you're talking about the event that kicked off the universe. My favorite way of asking it is, who lit the fuse? You can tell I'm thinking that there is some persona who thought this thing out in advance. I'm not sure that that is true, but I'm sure that the question of what caused the Big Bang, I'm sure of two things. One is, it's a really important question, and the other is, it's unknowable. Science can go back, and by the way, be impressed by this. Science can go back to within billionths of a second after the Big Bang. And if you're talking about a billionth of anything, that's just a really small fraction, The tools of science can take you back almost to the very beginning, but not the very beginning. And the tools of science are incapable of going back before the beginning. And the problem appears to be that there was no before. There was no time. Yeah, I've been waiting. You wait long enough. What have you got?
Okay. I'm going to take one of the four things that's most important. Okay. You've got a set of differential equations that represent the beginning of the universe. So you've got...
Oh, you mean the things that fill up Sheldon Cooper's blackboard?
No. One equation. My brother spent 20 years learning quantum molecular dynamics. I have to share this. So they go backward and forward in time. Backward and forward in time.
Are you talking about Feynman diagrams?
No.
You're not.
That's too simple-minded.
Okay.
And I'm just telling you, this is...
Richard Feynman would be appalled to hear you say that they're simple-minded. But go ahead.
He would be delighted because the brilliance of him take mathematics and business. So in effect, you have a committee of four entities in the four universes. One translating back
One cookie.
the other one going in and out of space. That
I really think
that
about
is-
passing me, I will share the
basically
cookie.
you have meaning
I get it, you don't need chop.
form and so they have brought a trade to trace that system. That is what the equation can be interpreted.
By the way, when I pray, I think I pray to that same God too.
I know.
And biologists have a slightly different tilt on that. That's all it is.
Let me share this thought more broadly.
Bago being tissue.
The question of what, if anything, caused it, I'm going to claim that's the most important question that you could come up with an answer to in your lifetime. Give me 15 seconds, okay? Because listen, and if you want to use the word God for it, go ahead. Either something caused the universe to happen or not, okay? And listen, if the answer is yeah, you better figure it out. You personally better figure it out. Because look, if it was a deliberate act, that means there is some cosmic purpose now, doesn't it? You with me? Because I'm unwilling to believe in a divine being that just creates universes for the heck of it. You know what I mean? that if creation with a capital C, and see, when you capitalize it, now you're talking about some divine being, doing that religion thing. Seriously, you guys, if that's true, you better figure it out before you die. Because if it's true, that means there is some purpose to your life that you're going to be held to. You know what I mean? So listen, in an atheistic universe where it just happened because it happened, then you have no obligation to live your life right. You have no obligation to live up to some cosmic purpose. But I'm being deadly serious now. If the religion thing is true, you better figure it out. Unless you believe that the divine being will not hold you accountable for living up to the purpose. And I'm not saying science can figure out the purpose. In fact, no. But I am saying the implication of was there or was there not a creator. That's a huge question, you guys. Take it personal. Because that's a huge question that applies to you. Oh, wait a minute. You were next.
Oh, I was just going to say, aren't there other universes? So what if somebody from another universe thinks, like, yeah, we're going to like this thing up and then make it a universe?
The question, by the way, when you say, aren't there other universes?
Oh, that's why I was trying to figure out that's what you was getting at.
Right now, it's popular in science fiction to assume that this is not the only universe, that there are parallel universes. Quantum physics allows for the possibility that that's not just fiction.
But it's gotta be only one.
Huh?
Only one parallel universe. Just like there's only, the other direction.
There are many in
Well,
the
no,
multiverse.
it depends on how you interpret.
Is there ever going to be a fourth dimension? Like a fourth dimension?
Yeah, I mean, of course, God has to be a multidimensional being.
Well, I'd agree with you. It's like, of course God has to be a multidimensional being. That God can't be some three-dimensional being trapped in our three dimensions.
I'm talking about the humans.
My imagination
Humans probably
fails
not.
when I try to imagine it playing out that way.
Because they
So
had
as a
like
matter
this
of your
finding
question,
talking about it.
this
They
might be
have been
the
talking about it
only
for quite a while
universe.
now.
This might be
When we
one-
upload ourselves
just
to
one
the human
version
thought
of the
process
universe
entity
out
of
of
computers,
perhaps
then we
an
will
infinite
evolve
number of
Yeah.
other
to the
universes.
next dimension.
Right now, there is no direct evidence that we can answer the question. But yeah, quantum theory allows for an infinite number, but that's theoretical. So,
And I was also going to say with the beast of the air thing, so what if it was just like bacteria and stuff in the air and they all go into the water whenever gravity and all that happened, and then we became plain
you lost me. Could you do it
Could you
again?
speak up too, please?
Alright. So I was saying like beast of the air, it started off as like little germs and
Oh,
bacteria in the
you're like
air.
we're talking about in lab, that the air is just full of
Yeah,
microscopic
exactly.
stuff.
And then it fell in the water.
Oh, so you want the beasts of the air to be those guys? Dang, you should write a book. I never thought of that one, but yeah, why not? Why not? Because oceans kick up surf spray, and if there's microorganisms living in the water, I'm going to have to get back to my theologian friends on this, because we weren't thinking micro when we had that talk. Huh, that's cool. That's almost worth like extra credit or something. And
Go ahead.
I actually have a theory for that. Isn't that the top bottom theory where everything came from the universe and then
I am unfamiliar with the idea, but man, there's a million ideas out there. And I'll thank you for sharing that with me. It's an interesting way to look at it, yeah. By the way, me personally, I don't know what I believe. Other than there's a purpose, and I can't even prove to you that that's a real deal, but I'm so convinced that the universe has a purpose, and therefore my life has a purpose, your life has a purpose. And I'm really convinced that if you haven't figured out your purpose yet, you better figure it out. Because I don't think we're here by accident, and I think somebody's keeping score.
I have to respectfully disagree. That equation has only two interpretations. It's either only one or four.
For
Okay.
Because that was, okay.
Oh, so you're not a partisan of the Copenhagen interpretation.
No, I'm not gonna do the fancy stuff, but redshift.
No, that's the
No,
infinite,
redshift got
the
proved.
infinite parallel universes.
Yep.
Hoyle's characterization of that
Can't wait to take physics, man.
was rejected by the whole physics team. That's what Jeremiah brought up.
Okay, listen, enough of your brother, okay?
But I'm talking about that interpretation to talk about it. So I'll talk to you about that.
Yeah, because the crowd is getting restless. Okay, so listen. The biology of this. Most of the world's religions teach that where species came from, I mean elephants and humans and oak trees, is that once upon a time, back at the beginning, they got created by a divine being and they got created in a certain order. I want to pick up with that because that's the straight up biology that we have to follow. First of all, I left a loose end hanging regarding the creation stories in Genesis, and this totally bears on the biology of the situation. Genesis 2 teaches a whole different series of events than Genesis 1. Genesis 1 is the 6 or 7 days of creation, right? Genesis 2 is a different story which contradicts Genesis 1. And incidentally, one of the reasons I have trouble taking Scripture as everything in there is true is because the Bible contradicts its own self in a number of spots. And let me share the Genesis 2 one, because it's a story that most people have heard. Genesis 2 is the Garden of Eden story. Genesis 2, and let me recap the biological highlights. The planet was bare. God created the first human, that was Adam. And then, you know how the story went from there, right? Adam is basically bored, want woman. So what God did is created remember, the rib, the clay, you make Eve, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, the planet was bare. In Genesis 2, the humans come first. And then the plants, the animals, the garden follow the appearance of the humans. The humans come first and the ecosystem happens next. Which, by the way, let's apply some science to the two creation stories in the book of Genesis. Food chains. It would be a very bad move to create eaters without having created the food chain first that's going to feed the humans. You know what I mean? It would make very good biological sense to do it the way that Genesis 1 says, which is, humans are kind of the last thing to come aboard, and by the time in Genesis 1, by the time the humans are there, everything else is in place. Genesis 1 is the one that I am saying compares well with the fossil record in terms of the series of events. Genesis 2 has it backwards compared to biology, compared to the fossil record. Genesis 2 has it backwards compared to Genesis 1. By the way, don't believe me about any of this. If it troubles you to go, wait a minute, there's two different creation stories that contradict each other, look it up your own self. And if or when you look it up, try to spot the contradiction, because it's not this subtle little thing that you might have missed. And then see if you can resolve the contradiction in your own mind. Is there any way for the series of events in Genesis 1 to be true at the same time the series of events in Genesis 2 is true? If you can find a way to do it, you might be the first human who has ever done it. Okay? It's a famous point of contradiction among theologians. And it matters to us because we're here to talk about where species came from in the first place. Let's flash forward to the 21st century. Do you know that species are still forming? I mean, like now?
Yeah.
the thing on the screen, that word speciation and the process to which it refers, the origin, the formation of new species. One thing that's totally clear if you're a biologist is that speciation is not something that happened once upon a time in the past and it's over with now. And if I were raising an objection to Genesis 1, which I kind of like all in all, it's that it leaves people with the idea that all of the species that ever got made back then, and then God just took the day off, and actually, I guess this is still the seventh day now, isn't it? I need you to know that going into this question, speciation is an ongoing thing. There are new species forming now. You can witness it happening in nature. I'll throw this in as if it were a fact everybody was comfortable with. If you're a plant biologist, you can actually come up with new species, new plant species, in a lab or a greenhouse without halfway trying hard. Did you know that about the plant kingdom?
Yeah.
It turns out that all you have to do is mess with the chromosome number. And plants, for reasons that don't matter right now, plant species are pretty easy to take them into a lab and mess with their chromosome number. And if you succeed at coming up with offspring that have a different number from the plants you started with, those offspring are almost certainly a new species. Which, would that give you a feeling of godlike scientific power if you just went into some botany lab and I'll use create with a little c here, created, some new species of plants that didn't exist the day before you went in there and did that. It's easy, by the way. There's a certain drug where if you apply that to cells, it messes up their cell division and causes them to produce offspring that have novel numbers of chromosomes. And if those offspring survive and start reproducing, they're a new species. Now, did you know that? Did you know that you personally, and by the way, where the money is in biology is come up with something new and then patent it. Because once you patent it, you have under the law a monopoly for 17 years. You've got a monopoly where if there's any money-making possibilities from that thing you came up with in the lab, nobody else can, for 17 years, do that thing. So, like in pharmacy, you invent a new drug, you got 17 years to get as rich as you're going to get off of that invention. And then it opens up, and anybody can do it. So if you were to invent a new plant species in lab, yeah, you can make money off of that. People do. Yeah.
So isn't this kind of like evolution? Isn't this like evolution then? Like,
Well, evolution is a process. Okay? And thank you for bringing that up. What we're going to try to look at is what process results in the formation of new species. And good insight. It's got to have something to do with this evolution stuff that I've been putting you through. So let's get hardcore. Starts with this. Memorize this. I'm not kidding. Memorize that. It's in the textbook. Easy for you to find. Memorize it. Not yet. It will be. It will be. Probably later today. There's 3 different ways of defining species. You guys need to know all 3. And I'm not talking about mindlessly memorize the words that make up the definition. Bunch of you tried that on the first exam and it didn't go well. Okay? Don't mindlessly memorize combinations of words as if they had meaning. Mindfully memorize. Yeah, make sure you know what's going on in there. So listen, let me talk you through the 3 of them. The biological definition is, I don't want to say it's the best of the 3, but it's the most utilitarian of the 3. If you want to explore the question of like, lions and tigers, are they the same species or what? The biological method is, you can think of it as a tool that you can use to explore questions like that. Criterion for identifying populations as species. Reproductive isolation. Listen, get that phrase down. Reproductive isolation. And what it means is the clause that follows the phrase on the screen. Reproductive isolation. They don't breed and, oh man, this is that. Your textbook has 3 or 4 things I've caught, which is a really small total, of things that make me go, man, they should have fixed that. In that sort of definition where it says they don't produce viable offspring, change viable to fertile.
Of course.
Listen, here's how the biological definition works. Members of a species can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Matter of fact, put that in your notes, because the way I just gave it to you is the most straight ahead, obvious. Members of the same species can reproduce and produce fertile offspring. So if you have 2 humans, that's the deal. Why they're members of the same species is that theoretically, it's not that everybody is required to mate with all the other members of your species, but theoretically, you and some other member of the opposite sex, yeah, y'all could produce fertile offspring. That's how you know you're the same species. Ligers, by the way, that's one of the coolest photos I know. Can you tell that they crossed a lion and a tiger to get that? Mm-hmm. They don't exist in nature. This is a zoo thing. Zookeepers for several decades now, they just tried it to see if it works. And, if you were to Google images for ligers, by the way, each liger looks different from every other liger. Right now there's about 40-some ligers on planet Earth. And what they all have in common is they've got some combination of lion characteristics and tiger characteristics. I chose this photo just because it's really obvious, the stripy pattern, for instance. Not all ligers have the stripes. Some ligers have a uniform coat the way lions do. But this guy, there's no denying that those are tiger stripes, and up at the head end, the mane and the head is clearly a lion thing rather than a tiger thing.
Can I ask a brief technical question?
Yeah.
How did they create that? Did they do it in the lab?
No, you just you find a female big cat in heat, and you find a male of the other species, and you let them, how to say politely, do it.
Do it.
You could do it artificially. You could do that test tube fertilization thing. You could biopsy the ovaries of a female, get some eggs. You could collect sperm off of a male, and then put them together in a dish. You could do. But that's the hard way, man. You just find a male and a female, let them do what they know how to do in the first place.
No, I have 4 children, I just did that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
10 out of 10.
That was 9.5. But listen, the thing about species, how you tell were they the same species or not, is you see if you get fertile offspring out of it. Now when you cross 2 humans, the young will be fertile, they could produce another generation. When you cross a lion and a tiger, no you don't. You do get offspring. Viable means that they live. And ligers are viable. That's why I invited you to fix that one word in the biological definition. Change it to fertile. Ligers are sterile. That's how you know that lions and tigers were not the same species all along. Lions and tigers are not capable of giving you fertile offspring. Now, you can cross a couple lions and get fertile offspring. That's how you know lions constitute a species. You could get a bunch of tigers and apply the definition, and yeah, if they're all tigers, they'll produce fertile offspring. So yeah, if you change that one term, that they don't produce fertile offspring, then you've got it. For the moment, ignore advantages and disadvantages. The second one down, the fancy name that people like to call it is the morphospecies concept. I don't want to say it's the old-fashioned term. A lot of places where you read up on this refer to it as the morphological definition. And morph means what?
Form.
Morph means form. Morphology. Ology is the study of. So morphology is the study of form, right? And morphospecies, that's a new term yeah, no, because it's catching on, the morphospecies concept. Okay. Morphology is the old one that the humans have been doing, since we were cave people. Seriously, before there was science, because people categorize things, and the old-fashioned way of defining a species, and a lot of people still think this is how it works, is that if they look similar to each other, they're the same species, and if they look different, see, that's a morphological thing. Morphology is your physical form, it's your appearance. So, I imagine that back when we were cave people, somebody went, lion, lions look different from tiger. Lion, I doubt that they had words like morphologically different. But if you just approach the world naively and you go, man, they're all big cats, but those ones that we're going to call, let's pick a name, lion, they all kind of look like each other, and then you got tigers, and they all look like each other. That's a morphological way of deciding what a species is. Please know that almost never can you get away with doing it that way anymore. And the sad thing is, seriously, tens of thousands of years of humans thinking about nature, how we did it was morphological. Oak trees look different from pine trees, you know what I mean? So oak trees must be different at the level of species compared to pine trees. Morphology has huge problems built into it. And the thing is, all of human history, we did it that way, and it's only been maybe the past century or so that we've realized how fraught with peril defining species that way really is. There are so many mistakes you can make. I'll give you an example. Wow, here's a couple examples. Can you picture a termite?
Mm-hmm.
They look like winged ants. And by the way, if you're a homeowner, yeah. Now, here's a fascinating thing. Looks very much like an ant with a pair of wings. But wait, there is such a thing as winged ants. Did you know that?
Yep.
He knew that. The rest of you guys know that?
Yeah.
Because listen, among the ants of planet Earth, most species are wingless, but there are a few species of ants that actually have wings. So here's the thing. If I handed you a termite, it's the workers who have wings, termite workers. If I handed you a termite and a winged ant, you'd go, oh, morphologically similar, they must be the same species because they look alike. Bad move. Okay? That's your first lesson. That you can have two species that are genuinely two different species when you use the biological definition. And yet, they look identical. So if you went by morphology, you would come to the wrong conclusion. In graduate school, I was a fruit fly guy. I trained under this fruit fly geneticist. And just trust me on this. There are on planet Earth over 200 different species of fruit fly. Those ones you see buzzing around your kitchen, that's one species. Okay, there's a couple hundred of them on planet Earth. And when you study those couple hundred, here's the weird part. There are species that are so identical to each other that even if you're looking at them under high-powered microscopes, which you do, you can't tell them apart based on their morphology. They can tell each other apart. Each one will mate with its own kind and refuse to mate with the other, even though they're morphologically identical. Which makes you wonder, if I'm a fruit fly of one species and you're a fruit fly of some other species that happens to look identical to my species, how do we know who's who? How do I know who to mate with? How do I know if you are my species or something else? They do it by smell. They do it by smell. By the way, if you have a dog, you know your dog can tell the difference between a human and a cat by smell, right? Okay. It turns out, by the way, this is a cool fact about you. It's not just that every species has its own smell, but that's a fact. It turns out it's a genetic thing. Did you know that you have a family smell? You do. You and your relatives have a smell that's just y'all's own smell. The human nose is notoriously weak. Most humans can't detect, at least not consciously, your own family smell. When you conduct, and psychologists have done a lot of this, you actually can register it, and you can distinguish individuals that are closely related to you from individuals who are not closely related to you by smell, but it hardly ever rises to the level of something conscious.
The family dog will recognize that. You need to check it.
Oh, my dog. Actually, we have two back when this happened. Bonnie and I have a dog pack. We are alpha in our dog pack. But my dog, the first time my dog met my sister, and you got to appreciate my dog, at least back at that time, that dog was a watchdog. That dog just, if that dog did not know somebody who came to the door, my dog would give those people a hard time. The first time my dog met my sister, it's like, oh, cool. You're one of the pack, aren't you? You smell like, my human. My sister and I share a family smell. Everybody shares a family smell with their relatives. Now, different dog 10 years later, my brother used to live on the West Coast, and nobody ever met my brother. But he came east one time, came over to the house, different dog, same story, man. My dog knew my brother because he smelled like the alpha male of the pack, which is me. So back to the species thing. If it surprises you to learn that each species has its own smell, that's the resolution to the question. You got these two species of fruit fly that the humans can't tell apart, but they can tell each other apart. Yeah, it's a chemical thing. It's a smell thing. They know who to mate with. They know with whom not to mate. Back to the termite thing. The thing I'm going on about is how morphology can let you down if you try to classify species based on, do they look the same, do they look different? I've got you thinking about termites now, where the workers, which is most of the individuals in a termite colony are the workers. They look like winged ants. Has anybody ever seen a termite queen?
Yeah.
How would you describe her?
Big, lumpy, white.
Big, lumpy, white, squishy. Yeah. A termite queen, and in a termite colony there is one queen. There is one fertile female in a termite colony. It's the queen, sort of like bees. Here's what a queen termite looks like. From the waist up, she looks like a regular old termite. I mean, picture a winged ant, from the waist up. So that's termite queen. Her bottom half depends on the species. It can be about the size of a football. And it's white, and it's squishy, and it's pulsating, and it looks just really like you don't really want somebody to hand you one of those. What a termite queen is an egg factory. She's got this enormous abdomen on her, and what's in that enormous abdomen is an enormous pair of ovaries. And her job in her lifetime is to lay a few 100,000 eggs. If somebody walked up to you in the street and they handed you a termite queen, and then they hand you, a male, little winged ant kind of looking thing, I would wager that you would not even guess them to be members of the same species because they are so different looking, morphologically different. The message here is don't trust morphology unless you have no other choice. By the way, what about humans? Are males morphologically different from females?
Yeah.
Please say yes. Okay. Now, does that mean that we males are a different species because we are morphologically different from females?
No.
Thank you for saying no.
Only the brain.
By the way, male brains are different from female brains. That's in biology. I'm not just talking behavior, I'm talking brains. So listen, if you ever thought that how you can tell members of the same species or how you can tell that maybe they're different, if you ever thought that morphology was the way to do it, please forget that, okay? How you do it, if you're able to, is get yourself a male and a female and see if the biological definition comes true. If you get fertile offspring out of that cross, then yes, that male and that female were the same species. And if you don't, then no, they weren't. The one thing about morphology, though, there are situations where you can't do the biological definition. I'm a dinosaur guy, and is it obvious to you that you can't do the biological test with dinosaurs? Well, birds you could. But like, just for instance, T-Rex was a 40-foot size of a Metro bus grown-up adult, right? You know that there were other Tyrannosauruses that were smaller than that? Do you know they just discovered, I think it was last year, an 8-foot, fully grown, 8-foot, looks like a T-Rex, but it's only 8 feet instead of 40 feet. Did you know that? Okay, so listen, now you know that Tyrannosaurus, that's a genus, okay? And you know this from lab, you abbreviate the first name, so Tyrannosaurus rex becomes T-Rex. What about like the small Tyrannosauruses? Were they the same species as T-Rex? Because like a human dwarf, think about that. Is a human dwarf a different species from the rest of us? No, you can mate with them. They can mate with you. You can get fertile offspring by mating with the dwarf. So a human dwarf is not a different species. But think about, you just discovered, some dinosaur looks like a T-Rex, but it's small. Maybe it's just a dwarf and a member of the same species as the T-Rexes that we know. By the way, you could rule out maybe it's just a young, baby or, young rather than mature. You can rule that out with the tiny T-Rex because you look at bones and the way bones grow, you can tell an adult from a young one. Yeah, you can. So if you think about it, you'd need a time machine, and you'd want to go back and see, could the big ones mate with the little ones?
No.
And if they did, would you get fertile offspring? It's impossible to perform the biological test if all you have is fossils. So the morphospecies concept, the morphological definition, people still use it, but you only use it in a situation where the biological definition can't be used. Over on the right, under disadvantages of the morphospecies concept, one is it's subjective. If you want to go, seriously, like lions and tigers, there's a lot of similarities. They're both members of the cat family. They both have a lot of cat features. There are a lot of similarities, even though they are different species. And it does get subjective. How similar, if all you had was the morphospecies way of looking at it, how similar do you need them to be till you're happy that they belong in the same category? Or how many differences do you need to see until you're happy when you decide they belong in different categories? In the 300 years that it's been since Linnaeus set this up, there has never been a day gone by where people didn't argue about the calls you make about how similar two living things are and should be put in the same species. We're about to embark on a 3-week lab thing in which we're going to tear the Linnaean classification system apart and replace it with what? I hear you cry. Listen, the third method, this is the one. In your careers as working biologists, it's all going to be phylogenetic. Okay? for now, mindlessly write down the phylogenetic definition there as if the words made sense to you. The smallest monophyletic group. I'll hold you to this. The smallest monophyletic group on a phylogenetic tree. Unless you've ever built a phylogenetic tree in the first place, I wouldn't be surprised if you don't really have a clear idea. What do they mean by a monophyletic group? And for that matter, what do they mean by, yeah, you got small ones and they're on a tree somewhere. Over the next couple weeks, I'm going to take you deep into this. But just know that seriously, all three of these get used. The morphospecies is pretty much limited to cases where you can't talk about getting live things and breeding them and seeing. By the way, notice over on the second line off to the right, under disadvantages of morphospecies, actually, go up to the top line. I'm sorry. Yeah. The disadvantages of the biological. One is that you can't apply it to fossils, not the biological. And the other is you can't apply it to asexual species, now can you? I mean, think about the bacteria you're growing in lab. You know, their reproductive style is you got one cell, divides into two, no sex, no nothing. So you can't really talk about, can you interbreed two species of bacteria and get fertile offspring? If you have a species that doesn't undergo sexual reproduction, the biological definition is useless. Bacteria, people, how you classify bacteria is you can do it by morphology. What look do they give you under the microscope? Everybody in biology, including microbiologists, are going with the phylogenetic way of doing things. That's a DNA-based method, by the way. And this is where all that DNA science that I inflicted on you earlier in the course and said, you know, you're going to need this when the time comes. The time has come. You know what I need you to do? Spring break is coming. If you are on the short list of people in the room that are totally lost when it comes to the DNA stuff in the textbook, use spring break to your advantage there. You can't get out of this course alive without getting into DNA. How deep you should take it is how deep I've been telling you all along to take it. But if those chapters are still a mystery to you personally, do something about it in the coming week or